It wasn't just inflation, it was the sound of your parents arguing about it in the next room. For a generation that came of age in the 1970s, money stopped being an abstract concept and became the emotional weather of the home. It was in the tension at the dinner table, in the worried glance exchanged over a stack of bills, in the unspoken rule that some things were simply not discussed outside the family. This chapter isn't about economics. It's about the psychology formed in that atmosphere. It's about how you learned to read the room before you learned to balance a checkbook. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. Feel free to share your own memory in the comments and subscribe for more explorations like this. The 1970s presented a fundamental rupture. The post-war promise, a steady job, a secure home, a predictable future, began to crack. For a child or teenager, this wasn't read in headlines about stagflation. It was felt. It was the palpable anxiety of adults who seemed, for the first time, overwhelmed by a world they couldn't control. Trust in institutions, from the government to the once infallible company man, was eroding. The ground wasn't just shifting. It felt porous, as if it could give way at any moment. And when the adults are nervous, the children become seismographs, sensitive to every tremor. This instability wasn't only economic, it was woven into the very fabric of family life. Divorce rates climbed sharply, redefining what home meant. The structure could change overnight. You might have learned about scarcity not from a textbook, but from shuffling between two households, noticing the different levels of financial strain in each. Money became tied to emotional security, or the lack thereof. It was the reason for the move, the source of the argument, the silent guest in every major decision. In this environment, you developed a sixth sense for volatility. You learned that plans were provisional, that situations could reverse, and that the only constant was the need to adapt. This bred a specific, deep-seated self-reliance. When the structures around you feel unreliable, you stop leaning on them. You internalize the idea that you must figure things out for yourself, and early. There was no manual for this new reality, so you observed. You watched how people coped or didn't. You saw the neighbor who lost his job, the cousin whose college fund evaporated, the family that quietly downsized their life. You didn't just witness financial caution, you absorbed a worldview. The lesson was clear. Dependence is a vulnerability. Counting on a single employer, a single income, a single version of the future, was a risk you couldn't afford to take. This psychology manifested in subtle, enduring ways. It's the reason why, even decades later, a sense of financial unease can linger long after the bank account says you're safe. It's not a logical assessment, it's a conditioned reflex. The neural pathways formed in an era of uncertainty don't simply switch off. You might be the person who, after a major purchase, feels a pang of anxiety instead of joy. It's not about the object, it's about the reduction of a safety buffer, a visceral echo of that old feeling of exposure. Security isn't measured in absolute wealth, but in the distance between you and potential disaster. This generation learned to equate money with control in a world that felt out of control. Saving wasn't just prudent. It was an act of creating a personal fortress against the chaos. A robust savings account meant options. It meant you wouldn't be trapped in a bad situation, be it a job or a marriage. It meant you could breathe. This is why showing off wealth often feels alien, even distasteful. Display is vulnerability. It attracts attention, invites judgment, and shatters the privacy that feels essential. Financial privacy becomes a core value. What you have is nobody's business, because your security depends on it not being a topic of discussion. The relationship with promises of stability became permanently complicated. After seeing pension plans questioned, industries collapse, and the buying power of a dollar halve, you developed a healthy, ingrained skepticism. Get-rich-quick schemes? They sound like a trap. Guaranteed returns? The word itself triggers doubt. Your approach to investing is likely methodical, research-heavy, and deeply cautious. You're not looking for a moonshot. You're looking for a steady, defendable position. Risk isn't exciting. It's a factor to be meticulously managed, often to the point of overmanagement. You're not trying to beat the market. You're trying to build something the market can't easily take away. This created a central contradiction that defines this generation's financial psyche. On one hand, a heightened alertness, a restraint that can border on restriction, a difficulty in fully relaxing into prosperity. On the other, a formidable resilience. You developed a tolerance for ambiguity that many later generations struggled to match. You learned to keep functioning without guarantees, to make decisions with incomplete information, to find a path when the map was torn. This is the hidden strength forged in that decade. The ability to adapt, to pivot, to endure uncertainty without falling apart. These are the survival skills the 1970s taught. So, when you look at your own relationship with money, the instinct to save rather than spend, the preference for liquidity, the slight flinch at debt, the desire for multiple income streams, understand it's not just a set of habits. It's the architecture of a mind shaped by a specific time. It's a psychology built not on theory, but on lived emotion. The cautiousness, the self-reliance, the private vigilance, these were rational adaptations to an irrational period. You weren't just learning about money in the 1970s, you were learning how to stand on ground that kept moving. And that lesson, once learned, becomes part of your foundation. If the first lesson was about the unstable ground, the second was about learning to walk on it alone. This chapter moves from the atmosphere of the era to the intimate daily behaviors it instilled. We're not talking about grand economic theories here, but about the quiet, almost invisible scripts that were written in the background of a 1970s childhood. Scripts about work, about want, about what it means to be secure. These aren't just memories, they are operating systems. Consider the concept of enough. For many shaped by that decade, enough is not a number you aim for, but a line you vigilantly defend. It's defined by what you need to withstand a crisis, not by what you desire for comfort. This is why someone from this generation can achieve significant financial success and still feel a deep-seated reluctance to upgrade their car or move to a larger home. It's not frugality for its own sake. It's a psychological buffer zone. Every dollar spent on non-essentials is perceived at a gut level as a reduction in your capacity to endure. Luxury feels less like a reward and more like a strategic error, a weakening of the walls. This connects directly to the relationship with work. The 1970s dismantled the myth of the single, lifelong career. You saw the factory close. You heard the stories of corporate layoffs that weren't about performance, but about restructuring. Consequently, work became less about identity and more about utility. A job was primarily a source of essential, defendable resources. Passion was a luxury. A reliable paycheck was a necessity. This forged a profoundly pragmatic and sometimes cynical view of labor. You learned to separate your self-worth from your job title. Your value was not what you did for a company, but what you could do for yourself. This is the root of the side hustle mentality before it had a name. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about not having all your eggs in one fragile basket. This self-reliance extended into the domestic sphere in very concrete ways. There was a cultural shift towards figuring it out. With rising costs and a distrust of expensive services, DIY wasn't a hobby, it was a household strategy. You watched or you participated as parents learned to fix the car, patch the drywall, or grow vegetables. The message was implicit but powerful. Dependence on paid experts is a financial vulnerability. The ability to repair, to maintain, to improvise was a form of financial security. It was money you didn't have to spend. This bred a hands-on, problem-solving approach to life that translates directly into managing finances. You trust your own research over a salesman's pitch. You'd rather understand the mechanics of an investment than blindly trust a broker. Then there is the complex relationship with material objects. In an age of planned obsolescence and booming consumerism, this generation often developed an opposing instinct: preservation. Things were kept, repaired, reused. It wasn't just about saving money, it was a philosophy. An object that lasted was a small victory over a disposable culture, a tangible piece of stability. This creates a subtle tension today. You might feel a genuine unease with the relentless cycle of buying and upgrading. A 10-year-old appliance that still works isn't outdated. It's trustworthy. This mindset extends to money itself. Capital is not primarily for consumption. It's a tool for preservation and slow, careful growth. But this psychology has its shadows. The difficulty with financial relaxation is perhaps the most telling. Imagine finally taking that vacation you've saved for, only to find a part of you is mentally calculating the cost per day, translating moments of leisure back into units of labor and security. It's hard to truly let go, because letting go feels like dropping your guard. For someone who learned that stability is temporary, enjoyment can feel like a precarious state. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. This isn't ingratitude. It's the echo of a time when good news was often followed by a correction, when a period of calm might just be the prelude to the next crisis. This vigilance shapes relationships too. Money discussions within partnerships can be charged with a historical weight that has little to do with the present numbers. Merging finances can feel like surrendering a hard-won personal fortress. The desire for financial privacy can be misinterpreted as secrecy or lack of trust, when in reality, it's a deeply ingrained protective mechanism. You learned that financial matters were private family affairs, often fraught, and so you keep them close. To openly discuss savings, debt, or salary feels exposing, almost dangerous. So what was inherited? It wasn't a stock portfolio or a piece of property. It was a set of emotional reflexes, a flinch when faced with debt, a default setting of caution before opportunity, a deep, abiding belief that the most important financial plan is Plan B. These aren't choices you make. They are lenses through which you see the world. They explain why you might prioritize a paid-off mortgage over a more lucrative investment, or why you derive more satisfaction from a growing savings account than from a luxury purchase. You are not optimizing for maximum wealth. You are optimizing for maximum resilience. This silent inheritance is a double-edged sword. It provides incredible strength, preparedness, and a sober realism that can navigate crises. But it can also impose a ceiling on joy, a hesitation that prevents seizing good fortune, and a loneliness in financial thinking. You became your own most reliable institution because the ones you saw around you seemed to be failing. That self-containment is your power, and sometimes your burden. The child who learned to read the anxiety in the room became the adult who can never quite stop scanning the horizon. The final chapter isn't about the past. It's about how that past lives on in the present tense. The psychology forged in the 1970s didn't stay there. It evolved, clashing and merging with a world that operates on entirely different rules. This is about the friction and the unexpected wisdom that arises when a generation shaped by scarcity navigates an era of apparent abundance. Look at the modern financial landscape. Frictionless spending, subscription models for everything, a constant digital invitation to compare, acquire, and upgrade. For a mind wired in the 1970s, this environment can feel like psychological noise. The buy now, pay later schemes aren't tempting, they're alarm bells. The cult of disruptive innovation can seem reckless, not revolutionary. This isn't being out of touch, it's a fundamental mismatch of operating systems. Your internal software, designed for stability and self-preservation, is running in a marketplace designed for impulse and perpetual growth. The result is often a sense of being out of step, a quiet alienation from the dominant money culture. This shows up most clearly in intergenerational dynamics. You might struggle to explain to your children or younger colleagues why you insist on a 20% down payment, why you're skeptical of cryptocurrency hype, or why you see a stable government bond as a thing of beauty. It can sound like fear, but from your perspective, it's not fear, it's memory. You're not avoiding risk, you're respecting a force you've seen in action. The younger generation, raised in different economic weather, often lacks that specific memory of systemic fragility. The dialogue isn't just between two opinions, it's between two lived historical experiences. Yet, here lies the profound contradiction that defines this generation's legacy. The very traits born from uncertainty have become, in many ways, astonishingly adaptive for new forms of uncertainty. Your tolerance for ambiguity? It's now called adaptability, a prize skill in a gig economy. Your distrust of a single income stream? It's the foundation of the modern portfolio career. Your DIY, figure-it-out mentality? It's the essence of the entrepreneurial mindset. The world has, in a strange twist, caught up to your psychology. What was once a survival mechanism is now often framed as a strategic advantage. The resilience you had to develop is now the very thing that allows you to weather modern economic shocks, the 2008 crash, the pandemic disruption, with a steadier hand. You'd already done the drills, but this doesn't erase the inner conflict. There remains a quiet war between the instinct to fortify and the desire to finally, truly, enjoy the fruits of a lifetime of caution. You may look at your own children and consciously try to spare them the anxiety you inherited, only to find you've passed on a different version of it, or that your attempts to provide security have made it harder for them to develop their own resilience. You want them to feel safe, but not to mistake the world for safe. This is the tightrope you walk. How to share the wisdom of preparedness without bequeathing the burden of perpetual alertness. So, what is the way forward? It begins with recognition, not just of the patterns, but of their origin. When you feel that familiar clutch of anxiety before a major financial decision, you can now name it. That's not a logical assessment of the present moment, that's the 1970s child checking the stability of the ground. This awareness creates a crucial space between impulse and action. It allows you to ask, is this my caution speaking or my wisdom? Is this a prudent boundary or an outdated limitation? The goal isn't to erase this deeply ingrained psychology. That's impossible, and arguably unwise. The goal is to integrate it, to honor the part of you that built resilience, that values security, that knows how to endure, and then, consciously, to make room for its counterpart, the part that can trust, that can spend without guilt on genuine joy, that can define security not just as the absence of threat, but as the presence of freedom. It's about allowing the fortress to have a garden. Your relationship with money, shaped in an era of rupture, is ultimately a relationship with trust and time. You learned that institutions could fail, that plans could unravel, that the future was not a promise. But you also learned that you could continue. You could adapt. You could build something meaningful even without guarantees. That is the enduring legacy, not just the caution, but the profound, hard-won resilience beneath it. You carry the weather of that decade with you, but you are no longer just a passive observer of the storm. You are the one who learned to build in all seasons. That knowledge, born of necessity, is your most valuable, non-monetary asset. If this reflection on a generation's quiet psychology resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. It helps us continue bringing these hidden histories of everyday life into the light.